you very much, Yanina, for a comprehensive background of the economic and socio-political situation here in the Philippines. Indeed, it's a very dangerous time to live here in the Philippines. I actually prepared a presentation. If I could be given the or allowed to be a co-host so that I can share the presentation. So I'll be talking about the history and struggle for a just and lasting peace in the Philippines and its prospects under the Marcos administration. So I'm Regletto Aldrich, Associate Professor of Philosophy from the University of the Philippines, Cebu. It is one of the campuses of the University of the Philippines, which is the national university. I'm a former core group member of the Philippine Ecumenical Peace Platform. So it is a group of Christian denominations funded by the Royal Norwegian government to support the peace negotiations between the government of the Philippines and communist insurgents. So this is a photo in one of the what we call peace summits conducted here in Cebu. So we have in this photo Christian leaders from the Roman Catholic, from the United Church of Christ in the Philippines, from the Philippine Independent Church, and several other Christian denominations. Joining the leaders is someone from the government panel, Hernani Braganza. Unfortunately, we were not able to secure a speaker from the communist side here. So yeah, and the people at the back are civil society leaders who are also supporting the peace talks between the government and the communist insurgents with the aim of finally instituting socioeconomic reforms, political reforms to address the root causes of the armed conflict. Okay. So, so for more than 4 decades, the Philippines has been under several colonizers. So first came the Spanish colonizers, and they brought with them they brought with them basically, especially to the Visayan and the Luzon areas, the feudal system of production, feudal system, and institutionalized, for example, the encomienda and hacienda system. And aside from this, the Spaniards also identified some middle persons, middlemen who would act as people who would pacify the other Filipinos, no? And yeah, would act as the middle persons, and this later would become the new breed of elite politicians who would become the trusted and loyal allies of the colonizers who would rule in behalf of the Spanish colonizers. So for more than 3 centuries, the Spaniards ruled the Philippines, and towards the end of the 19th century, nationalist and revolutionary movements eventually challenged the Spanish colonial rule. And while the revolutionary movement was about to really win in a nationwide scale, the Americans came to claim for themselves the victory, to act as the liberators of the Filipinos, and even waged a very deadly and barbaric war against the Filipinos. So instead of enjoying liberation, the Filipinos were subjugated by another colonizer, the American colonizers this time. So they were here for more than half a century, and basically just continued what the Spaniards started. So the problem that the problem of landlessness basically just continued. The peasants were more and more deprived of the land that they were tilling, while the Americans introduced suffrage and democratic style of governance, but they were also able to train trusted Filipino elites who would rule in their behalf. Thus, even after they left the Philippines in 1946, the country was under what we call new colonialism. And then for a short period of time, for like 3 years, the Japanese also invaded the country. So basically there are in the Philippines there are what we call colonial residues or colonial legacies. So we need to contextualize the the struggle for peace that civil society organizations are currently fighting for within the background of colonialism and neo-colonialism, because colonialism has bred, for example, foreign control in in several aspects of the country, the economy, politics, culture, and many others. So all of the Philippine presidents have been, when they run for presidency, have been um, seeking the blessing, no, of the US, no, for them to be able to uh, seeking the support for them to be able to attain legitimacy against their opponents. So there's this foreign control. Um, Laws are made to basically serve the interests of foreign capitalists or big businesses to the detriment of the interests of, say, for example, the indigenous peoples in Mindanao. Yanina was able to mention the experiences of indigenous groups, no, in Mindanao. So their lands have been rubbed away from them in favor of big multinational companies. And in relation to that, also, there is still the lingering problem of land monopoly. So while there have been many attempts to redistribute land in the past, there were many land reform programs in the past, but these programs were intentionally designed to have some loopholes for the landlords to circumvent these. You know? And what's actually problematic in the Philippines is that those who make land reform programs are themselves landlords, no, big landowners, or if not representatives of these big landowners. Which also brings us back to the third problem of elite Ilustrado politics, where those the elite are just the ones who share among themselves political power. You know? So in the Philippines, political dynasty is a very prevalent issue where clans, families of elite origin are just yeah, competing among themselves during the elections, political power, and use this political power to further advance their business and their land interests, and to serve further foreign the interests, you know, of big foreign businesses. So these have been these issues, you know, are very much entrenched in in the Philippine society, that several organizations, progressive organizations, civil society groups have been struggling, you know, have been fighting to end these issues, or the issues that result from the three problems that I mentioned earlier. So we have here from the church, you know, from the students, you know, and the academic sector, from the indigenous peoples who are calling to stop large-scale mining in Mindanao, mining which has resulted to the killing of indigenous peoples as well, and the rampant, no, impunity in the Philippines, which basically just leaves behind, or ignores the killings that are taking place in the Philippines. No? Killings not only against the most marginalized sectors like the peasants and the workers, but even among the middle class, no? The lawyers, even church people. So we have Father Tito Paez, for example, was murdered at the beginning of the Duterte administration. So,
and the AFP is alarmed over an increasing number.
I'll share a short video.
And the AFP is alarmed over an increasing number of youth joining the NPA. The number of young individuals joining the New People's Army in the Cordillera region is increasing. As Dobby de Guzman tells us, most of the new recruits are from Manila.
Commander Corinne has a degree in international studies from one of the country's leading universities. After graduation, she immediately applied for a staff position in the country's foreign service. She was hired, but she didn't accept the offer. She decided to join the New People's Army.
Noong una, talagang hirap na hirap silang tanggapin. Dumaan yung nanay ko sa matinding stress. Nagkaroon siya ng mental fatigue.
Caroja, a former journalism student at UP Diliman, is also a member of the NPA command in Ifugao.
Hindi ko naman siya give up. Kasi parang maski naman dito sa revolusyonaryong kilusan, nagagawa ko pa rin yung magsulat at saka magpaliwanag at saka lahat ng ginagawa ng isang journalist sa isang mainstream media, nagagawa ko naman dito.
The two rebels believe serving the masses is more noble than climbing the corporate ladder. Kajan, who is also from Manila, said the NPA in the Cordillera region remains solid because of the young blood joining the insurgency.
Kahit anong mga sabihin ng gobyerno kontra sa kilusan, nakikita naman ng napakalawak ng mga kabataan yung kawastuhan ng sinasabi ng revolusyonaryong kilusan tungkol sa kung paano napapabayaan yung mga kabataan.
Some experts say the government is creating its own enemy.
Ito din inagpapakita na tumataas yung level ng discontent ng tao, particular ng mga kababaihan, sa gobyerno, sa batas, sa pagpapatupad ng batas, at iba pang mga policies.
So they join because of the sense of adventure, but later on they will realize na sometimes they are hooked or sometimes they were duped.
The Armed Forces of the Philippines admitted that this is a huge concern that needs to be addressed.
Tunay na isang malaking problema sa atin ito, lalong-lalo na sa isang pamilya na kung saan nagmula itong mga kabataan na to, sapagkat malaki ang mawawala sa kanila yung mga pangarap ng mga magulang nila na magkaroon ng magandang kinabukasan.
According to Major Bulusan, the AFP continues to strengthen its information education campaign to dissuade the youth from joining the communist movement. Dobby de Guzman, ABS-CBN News.
Okay. So aside from the struggles that civil society organizations are waging, there's also separate, armed struggle that's waged in the countryside, in the hinterlands of the Philippines, basically to end the problems that I have mentioned in the previous slide. So there have been several administrations that confronted the said armed conflict that's waged by the communists, and it's either they have declared an all-out war against the Communist Party of the Philippines and the New People's Army, or they have in one way or another settled for a peaceful resolution of the conflict. So I'll briefly give you a historical background about this. So in 1968, the Communist Party of the Philippines was established. This was during the time of the dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr. And a year after that, the New People's Army was also established. So the two groups have been waging an armed struggle with the hope of ending the three colonial legacies that I have mentioned earlier. Then in 1973, the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, or the NTFP, is the political organization of the CPP-NPA, or the Alliance of All Forces, calling for armed struggle, was also formed. So this was during the time of Marcos. So the Marcos regime was or gave birth because of the crisis, economic and political crisis that was taking place back then. Armed insurgency waged by the communists emerged. So that's basically for more than a decade, no, of dictatorial rule. And when finally the Marcos administration was toppled by 1986, the succeeding administration of Cory Aquino entertained the peaceful resolution of the armed conflict. So it was during her term that the first negotiations between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the NDFP were carried out. However, the negotiations was short-lived because later on, a year after, peasants were violently massacred, no? While they were peacefully protesting to pressure the Cory administration to immediately redistribute the lands that she promised, that her administration promised to redistribute, no? So I guess 14 peasants were killed in this event. So the NDFP withdrew from the negotiating table, and there was an impasse in the peace negotiations. Then came the Ramos administration. Ramos is a West Pointer. He's a general. He's a military general, and he was rather open to the peace negotiations. And it was even during his term that a significant agreement was reached. This was called the Hague Joint Agreement of 1992. So basically, the Hague Joint Agreement laid the foundations or the framework for the peace negotiations, and it identified 4 substantive agenda. You have human rights and international humanitarian law, socioeconomic reforms, political and constitutional reforms, and then the disposition of forces and cessation of hostility. So the logic of the agreement was to follow this in order. No? So you have to address first human rights and international humanitarian law. The two parties acknowledged that there is a civil war, and while they wage a civil war, they must be as humane as possible. So they have to adhere to international humanitarian law, and afterwards, socioeconomic reforms have to be addressed or have to be reached in order for the root causes of the problems to be addressed as well. And for these socioeconomic reforms to be institutionalized, certain reforms also legal, political, and constitutional reforms have to be established. And it's only after that that forces can be disposed of, no, and there's a cessation to hostility. So it was also in the Ramos administration that the document JASIG, Joint Agreement on Safety and Immunity Guarantees, was signed. So this basically gave immunities to both the parties, the GRP and the NDFP, against surveillance, harassments, arrests, no, and other forms of atrocious, no, activities. And in 1998, during the Estrada administration, the first item for the substantive agenda was signed. This was the CARIL, or the Comprehensive Agreement for the Respect of Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law. So later on, the next administration, the Arroyo administration, because of her brutal counterinsurgency efforts called the Oplan Bantaylaya 1 and 2, which basically started, not actually started, but intensified, no? Because it was in the Marcos administration where red tagging basically started, no? Through Oplan Bantaylaya 1 and 2, many legal activists were summarily executed, abducted, and harassed because of the baseless red tagging accusations, no? What Yanina had mentioned earlier. So and later on, Arroyo declared the CPP-NPA along with the chief political consultant of the NDFP, Jose Maria Sison, as terrorist group, thereby rendering impossible the continuation of the talks. So the political environment that could actually somehow make the peace talks more conducive was lost, no, because of this unfortunate developments. So then later there was the second Aquino administration, but initially there was a hope, no? Almost all presidents actually are open to negotiations to the resumption of peace talks during their first years of office, but later on they would somehow make a retract with their earlier statements, and this was also true with the second Aquino administration, who his advisors described, no, the previously signed documents, no, the Carril, the Hague Joint Agreement as documents of perpetual division. So what the administration, the Aquino administration wants to do is even to reverse the process, no, of reverse the logic of the Hague Joint Agreement, to start first with the disposition of forces and only later address the socio-economic and political reforms. So there was no common ground to resume the peace talks because of this. Supposedly it was the Hague Joint Agreement that would allow a common ground, but because the administration again described as a document of perpetual division, so peace negotiations was not very successful during that time. So and then of course the previous Duterte administration, who initially expressed willingness to resume the peace talks and even released some of the negotiators of the NDFP who were arrested in the previous administrations despite their JASIG document, no? Supposedly their immunity from being arrested. So Duterte released some of the negotiators. But later on, when Duterte was already surrounded by military officials, no, he appointed more than 50 retired military officials to his cabinet. Eventually, his original and initial pronouncements to pursue the peace negotiations was this time abandoned, no. So and then later he created the NTF-LCAC, the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict. So what the administration wanted to do is to localize the peace talks in different regions, a move which the NDFP did not really agree to, because of course the logic of the NDFP is that we are talking about systemic national issues, and this could not be addressed by local regionalized negotiations. And then it was also in the time of the Duterte administration that the draconian anti-terror law was enacted. Yanina was able to mention this a while ago. And basically through the law, anyone who would anyone who's critical with the government, progressive organizations, unionists, could easily be tagged as terrorists and be criminalized, no, by the government. So okay, so the I'm almost out of time, but supposedly it was during the time of the Duterte administration that the second item of the substantive agenda be addressed, and it is the CASER. So it's the Comprehensive Agreement for Socio-Economic Reforms. So initially both parties, when the NDFP and the GRP, when the GRP was still led by civilian negotiators, both parties recognized that the armed conflict was basically caused by socio-economic maladies, and in order for these for the armed conflict to cease, socio-economic problems have to be addressed, and that's why it's just important and crucial to sign the CASER, or the Comprehensive Agreement for Socio-Economic Reforms. On the left side of the screen is the government version of the CASER, and the right side of the screen is the NDFP version of the CASER. So while both documents actually differ essentially, what they do have in common is the recognition that socio-economic reforms have to be built upon agrarian reform and rural development on the one hand, and national industrialization and economic development on the other. So I've already mentioned a while ago how colonialism and neocolonialism has basically perpetuated a situation of landlessness here in the Philippines, and have caused not only the poverty of the rural population, but also in general, the stagnation of the economic situation of the Philippines. So addressing the issue of landlessness and implementing genuine agrarian reform would actually pave the way for rural development. And on the other hand, building national industries in the Philippines, making Philippines economically independent, would somehow provide jobs for Filipinos, increase productivity for the country, and so on and so forth. So these two elements, these two aspects were recognized by both the government and the NBFP panel. So the civil society organizations, the church, even the academe, was very optimistic in 2016 to 2017, when both panels were already talking about Kaser. And they were hopeful that finally, the root causes of the conflict would be addressed. But unfortunately, as I've mentioned earlier, when the Duterte administration was already surrounded by military elements, by the security sector, things drastically changed, and even went on to the regime, and even went on to terror tag the NBFP itself and its supposed sympathizers, civil society organizations, unionists, and progressive organizations. So what's the prospects of peace under a Marcos presidency? So the Marcos Jr. has been silent on the issue of the resumption of talks between the GRP and the NDFP. Even in his campaign, during his campaign period, he was basically silent about the issue, and his administration has not reversed any single policy that the previous Duterte administration has initiated. For example, the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict is still there. The NTF-ELCAC is notorious for red tagging virtually anyone. Just weeks ago, its former spokesperson red tagged a judge, who gave a decision that dismissed the petition of the government proscribing, requesting the proscription of the Communist Party of the Philippines as a terrorist organization. So the judge actually gave a very, very logical, very salient point on why she dismissed it. But rather than debunking point by point the decision, the NTF-ELCAC just basically red tagged her and red tagged everyone that supported the judge. So the prospects for the resumption of peace talks and eventually implementing socioeconomic reforms in the Philippines under the Marcos regime is quite dim. However, civil society organizations, including the church and the academe, have been initiating the campaign to pressure the Marcos administration to go back to the negotiating table and there genuinely address the root causes of the armed conflict, continue the talks for the Kaser, and address some of the issues concerning human rights that have been alleged by both parties. So it is always our desire that these negotiations be resumed, be sustained, and eventually be completed, and expressed through agreements, so that finally, after years of new colonialism and colonialism, we could get to enjoy, what social justice is. I think that has been systematically denied from us, especially the most marginalized sectors of society, of the Philippine society. So it's our belief that peace is always based on social justice. It always demands social justice, and it is our commitment to pursue peace. Even if peace workers, or those working for peace here in the Philippines, are even red tagged just because we are also demanding, we are also calling for the signing of the Kaser. So it's actually how hilarious it is here in the Philippines. When we just simply call for reforms, we get red tagged. I have been red tagged as well, and what's alarming about this red tagging is that it's a prelude towards assassination. So there have been many activists that have been red tagged in the past, even academics are not spared of this red tagging. So yeah, indeed, it's dangerous to live here in the Philippines, but we could only continue to be committed to this, to the fight for social justice, to the fight for freedom, to the fight for democracy. So I think I'll end my discussion there. My apologies for going over the time. Thank you very much.